The security footage played on my laptop in excruciating clarity. There was Mark, my husband of 8 years, punching in our alarm code. Behind him stood a slender blonde I'd never seen before, her arms filled with shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford. She looked around our foyer with the curious gaze of someone seeing a new place for the first time, then leaned to whisper something in Mark's ear. He laughed, setting down his briefcase, the same one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, and led her upstairs to our bedroom. My hands trembled as I paused the footage from our home security system, a system Mark had insisted on installing for our protection 6 months ago. The timestamp showed 2:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. A Tuesday when Mark had texted me that he was swamped at the office and would be working late again. A Tuesday when I was supposedly the only one with access to our home. Beneath the video window sat my open banking app, displaying a transaction I hadn't made, $125,000 transferred from our joint savings to an account I didn't recognize. Our entire renovation fund, the money we'd saved for 5 years to finally finish our dream home, gone. Just like that. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "We need to talk. I'll be home by 7. That's when I knew. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated exit strategy. And our home, the 1920s colonial in Shaker Heights that we'd lovingly restored room by room, the home we'd bought with my inheritance after my father passed, was ground zero. What Mark couldn't possibly know was that his betrayal would set in motion a chain of events that would expose far more than just his infidelity. By the time this was over, every hidden truth would come to light, and Mark would pay, literally and figuratively, for every moment of deception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day had started normally enough. I woke at 5:30 a.m. for my morning run along Lake Erie, showered, and headed to my job as marketing director for Cleveland Memorial Hospital. Mark had already left for his construction company in Euclid, or so I'd thought. Lunch was a quick salad at my desk while reviewing campaign metrics for our new cardiac care initiative. It wasn't until mid-afternoon, when I received an alert from our home security system, that my world began to unravel. At first, I ignored it, probably the cleaning service arriving early, but something nagged at me. We didn't have cleaning scheduled for Tuesdays. One quick check of the security app, and everything changed. I left work immediately, telling my assistant I had a family emergency. The 20-minute drive from downtown Cleveland to Shaker Heights felt like hours. My mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. By the time I pulled into our driveway at 4:15 p.m., I'd convinced myself there must be some explanation. Mark would never betray me this way, not after everything we'd been through together. Our home sat silent and empty when I arrived, but the evidence remained. A pink jacket I'd never seen draped over our living room chair. Unfamiliar toiletries in our guest bathroom. A half-empty wine glass on the kitchen counter. Mark knew I didn't drink red wine. I sat at our kitchen island, the granite countertop cool beneath my trembling hands, and forced myself to check our other accounts. The investment portfolio we'd built together, drastically diminished. Our checking account, nearly empty except for what would cover this month's mortgage. Even my personal savings account, which Mark shouldn't have had access to, showed unusual activity, a series of small withdrawals over several months that had escaped my notice. As I pieced together the financial devastation, I recalled subtle changes in Mark's behavior. The password changes on our accounts that he claimed were for security purposes. His sudden interest in handling all our finances after years of sharing that responsibility. The unexplained business trips that had become more frequent. The way he'd discouraged me from attending his company events over the past year. I'd attributed it all to stress. His construction company had landed several major contracts recently, and I'd been proud of his success. How blind I'd been. At exactly 7:03 p.m., I heard his key in the lock. I'd positioned myself at the dining room table, laptop open to the security, footage, bank statements spread before me like a roadmap of betrayal. Mark entered with the confidence of a man who thought he still had the upper hand. He stopped short when he saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to a practiced concern. "Jess, you're home early. I was just about to call you." His voice was steady, but I noticed how his eyes darted to the papers on the table, assessing the damage. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. He hesitated, then sighed, setting down his briefcase as if the weight of his lies had suddenly become too heavy to carry. "Her name is Ashley. She works in my office. Your administrative assistant, the one you hired 6 months ago." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "You've met her?" "No, Mark. I've never met the woman who's apparently living in my house, but I do check the company newsletter occasionally." He pulled out the chair across from me, but I shook my head. "Don't sit. You don't get to make yourself comfortable while you explain why there's a stranger's belongings in our home and why our savings account is empty." Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "It just happened, Jess. We didn't plan it." "Really? Because emptying our account seems pretty planned to me. The $125,000 for our renovation just happened to transfer itself?" His expression hardened. "That money was largely from my business profits. Money we agreed to put toward finishing our home. My inheritance paid for this house, Mark. Or have you conveniently forgotten that? Look, I didn't want it to happen this way. I was going to tell you this weekend. Ashley and I held up my hand. "Stop. I don't want to hear her name again. What I want is for you to explain where my money is and why you thought you had the right to take it." Mark's facade cracked slightly. "Your money? I've been the one working 60-hour weeks while you plan charity galas and design brochures." The casual dismissal of my career, one that had supported us during the lean years when his business was struggling, ignited something in me. A cold, clear fury that burned away the shock and hurt. "You have until tomorrow to return every penny you took," I said, standing. "After that, I'm calling Daniel Roberts." Mark's face paled slightly. Daniel was the best divorce attorney in Cleveland, known for his ruthless efficiency and perfect record. He was also my cousin. "Jess, be reasonable. We can work this out. Without lawyers. I'll give you the house." "The house that's in both our names? The house my inheritance paid for? How generous of you." I gathered the bank statements, sliding them into a folder. "And where exactly is Ashley right now? Waiting until the coast is clear to come home? Our home?" His silence was confirmation enough. "I want her things out of this house by morning, and if a single penny is missing from our accounts by noon, tomorrow, I'll not only call Daniel, I'll file a police report for financial fraud." Mark's expression darkened. "You're overreacting. This isn't fraud. We're married. I had every legal right to access those accounts." "We'll see what a judge has to say about that, particularly when they review the text messages where you specifically agreed that money was for our home renovation." I was bluffing. I had no idea if such texts would hold any legal weight. But the flicker of uncertainty in Mark's eyes told me I'd struck a nerve. "One more thing," I added, heading for the stairs. "I'll be staying at Rachel's tonight. When I return tomorrow, I expect Ashley's belongings gone, the money returned, and you ready to discuss separation terms civilly. Otherwise, I promise you'll regret underestimating me." That night, curled on Rachel's guest bed, I alternated between silent tears and furious Google searches about divorce laws in Ohio. Rachel, my best friend since college, sat beside me, her presence a steady comfort. "I just can't believe he moved her into our home," I said for perhaps the dozenth time. "Who does that?" "A narcissistic jerk who thought he wouldn't get caught," Rachel replied, refilling my tea. The question is, what are you going to do now? It was a question I'd been asking myself since the moment I saw that security footage. Throughout my drive to Rachel's condo near downtown, throughout my tearful explanation of Mark's betrayal, throughout the initial shock and heartbreak, something had been crystallizing within me, a determination I hadn't known I possessed. I'm going to make him regret ever thinking he could take what's mine, I said finally. Not just the money, but my dignity, my future. He doesn't get to steal those too. Rachel nodded, a small smile forming. That's the Jessica I know, so what's the plan? I picked up my phone. First, I'm calling Daniel. Even if Mark returns the money tomorrow, this marriage is over. I need to protect myself. It's nearly midnight, Rachel pointed out. Daniel won't mind. Not for this. I was right. My cousin answered on the third ring, and after a brief explanation, agreed to meet me first thing in the morning. Next, I continued after ending the call, I need to secure any remaining assets before Mark can get to them. I spent the next hour changing passwords, moving what little remained in my personal accounts to a new bank entirely, and documenting every unauthorized withdrawal I could find. And third, Rachel prompted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked up from my laptop, a calm settling over me that felt almost foreign in its certainty. Third, I'm going to find out exactly what else he's been hiding. Because men like Mark, men who can lie to your face for months while planning their escape, they never stop at just one betrayal. Morning came with a text from Mark. Money has been returned to the joint account. We need to talk. No apology, no explanation, just the expectation that I would come running back now that he'd been caught. I ignored it and headed to Daniel's office on Euclid Avenue. The glass high-rise reflected the morning sun, gleaming like the truth I was determined to uncover. Daniel listened without interruption as I laid out everything. The affair, the hidden girlfriend, the financial transfers, the suspicious business trips. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, expression thoughtful. Based on what you've told me, we have several paths forward, he said. The strongest position would be if we could prove Mark was hiding assets or committing actual fraud, not just making withdrawals from joint accounts. How would we do that? I work with an excellent financial investigator, Karen Chen. She specializes in uncovering hidden assets in high-conflict divorces. With your permission, I'd like to bring her in. I nodded immediately. Do it. Whatever. It costs. Daniel's expression softened slightly. Jessica, before we proceed, I need to ask, are you sure this is what you want? Once we file, there's no going back to how things were. The question gave me pause. Was this what I wanted? The end of an 8-year marriage? The dissolution of the life we'd built together? For a brief moment, I remembered the good times, Mark surprising me with a weekend trip for our anniversary, his unwavering support when I was passed over for promotion last year, the way he'd nursed me through pneumonia 2 winters ago. But those memories were now tainted, like photographs left too long in the sun. Had any of it been real? Or had Mark been calculating his exit all along, just waiting for the right opportunity? I'm sure, I said firmly. He betrayed everything we built together. I won't let him take anything else from me. Daniel nodded, respect evident in his gaze. Then let's get started. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal terminology and financial deep dives. I moved back into our home, my home, while Mark relocated to an apartment downtown, supposedly alone, though I had my doubts. We communicated only through lawyers, a fact that seemed to increasingly frustrate him. Can't we just talk this through? Ourselves? He texted one evening. The lawyers are costing us both. Us. As if we were still a unit, as if he hadn't shattered that concept when he moved another woman into our home. I didn't respond. Karen Chen, the financial investigator Daniel had recommended, turned out to be worth every penny of her considerable fee. Petite, precise, and possessing an almost supernatural ability to follow money trails, she approached my case with methodical determination. "Your husband has been busy," she informed me during our third meeting, sliding a folder across Daniel's conference table. "And not very creative, thankfully." Inside was evidence of what appeared to be a second business, a shell company named Miller Development Group, that had been receiving regular transfers from Mark's legitimate construction company. "He's been siphoning profits for at least 2 years," Karen explained. "Based on these transfers, I estimate approximately $350,000 has been diverted." The amount staggered me. "Where did it all go?" Karen turned to a spreadsheet. "Some went to a condo purchase in Florida under the shell company's name. Some to a separate investment account we're still tracing, and approximately $80,000 went to various expenses that appear personal in nature. High-end restaurants, jewelry purchases, weekend trips to Chicago and New York. Trips Mark had claimed were for business. Weekends I'd spent alone, often working on our house. Is this legal?" I asked, looking between Karen and Daniel. "Moving business profits to a separate company isn't illegal in itself," Daniel explained. "But doing so to hide assets during a divorce? That's fraudulent concealment. And based on the timing of these transfers increasing dramatically 6 months ago, we can make a strong case that he was preparing to leave the marriage and hide assets. 6 months ago, when Ashley was hired, when the security system was installed, when Mark suddenly became too busy for our regular date nights. What does this mean for the divorce?" I asked. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "It means we've got him, Jessica. Judges take a very dim view of hiding assets. In Ohio, the court can award you more than 50% of the marital assets if financial misconduct is proven. For the first time since discovering Mark's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. Not for reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment I saw Ashley entering my home, but for justice, for vindication." "What's our next step?" I asked. "We file immediately and request emergency orders to freeze the shell company's assets," Daniel replied. "And we prepare for Mark to fight back. Men like him don't surrender easily." Daniel was right. When Mark was served with divorce papers that specifically mentioned the shell company and hidden assets, his response was swift and vicious. Suddenly, I was being painted as a neglectful wife who had driven him to seek comfort elsewhere. My career was characterized as a hobby that had taken time away from supporting his business. There were even vague accusations about my friendship with Rachel's brother, a man I'd met exactly twice at holiday gatherings. "Classic deflection tactic," Daniel assured me when I brought him the allegations. "He's trying to distract from his own misconduct by slinging mud at you. It's transparent and desperate." Still, the public nature of the accusations stung. Colleagues at the hospital gave me pitying looks. Friends from our social circle took sides, many gravitating toward Mark's more dramatic version of events. Even my mother called from Florida, concerned about rumors she'd heard from her bridge partner whose son worked at Mark's company. Through it all, I maintained my silence publicly, letting Daniel handle the legal responses while I focused on work and gathering additional evidence. Each night, I returned to the half-finished house that had once represented our future, sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to use the master bedroom Mark had shared with Ashley. The isolation might have broken me if not for Rachel's unwavering support and a surprising ally in Robert Johnson, Mark's business partner. Robert contacted me 6 weeks into the divorce proceedings, asking to meet privately. We sat at a quiet corner table in Rising Grounds Cafe, far from downtown where Mark's business associates typically lunched. Robert looked uncomfortable, fidgeting, with his coffee cup. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said quietly. "But what Mark's doing isn't right." "Which part?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "All of it. The affair, the hidden accounts, the way he's talking about you to anyone who'll listen? Robert leaned forward. But, especially, the property deal. What property deal? Robert glanced around nervously. The Lakeside project. It's a major development deal that's set to be announced next month. Waterfront condos and retail space. Mark used money from the company, including funds that should have been reflected in your marital assets, to secure the land last year. My mind raced. How much? The initial investment was close to $1 million, but once the zoning approval comes through next week, that property will quadruple in value. $1 million. Hidden from both our marriage and apparently the business's official books. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Robert sighed. Because I've got 3 daughters, and if any man did to them what Mark's doing to you, I'd want someone to step up. Plus, he added, a hint of anger finally breaking through his professional demeanor. He's been lying to me too. This was supposed to be a company investment, not his personal cash grab. I left the meeting with a handwritten list of dates, account numbers, and property details. Information Karen Chen confirmed the next day was legitimate and potentially transformative for my case. This is exactly what we needed, she said, excitement evident in her typically composed demeanor. With this timeline, we can prove intent to defraud both you and his business partner. The judge assigned to our case, Patricia Williams, was known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. When Daniel presented the evidence of Mark's hidden assets, including the bombshell Lakeside project information, her expression remained impassive, but her questions became increasingly pointed. Mark's attorney, a slick downtown lawyer named Gregory Phillips, attempted to characterize the business maneuvers as standard practice for entrepreneurs. My client was simply protecting his business interests through diversification, he argued. Mrs. Miller was well aware of the demanding nature of building a successful construction company. Judge Williams peered over her reading glasses. Was Mrs. Miller also aware of the shell company that purchased a Florida condominium where her name does not appear on the deed, despite it being acquired with marital assets? The courtroom fell silent. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, these bank statements clearly show transfers to this shell company increased dramatically at approximately the same time Mr. Miller began his extramarital relationship. An interesting coincidence. By the time the emergency hearing concluded, the judge had frozen all assets connected to Miller Development Group, including the Lakeside project property, and scheduled a full financial disclosure hearing for the following month. As we left the courthouse, I caught Mark's gaze across the marble lobby. The confident, successful businessman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, desperate and cornered. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. This isn't over, he muttered as we passed each other. You have no idea what you're doing to us. Us. There it was again. There is no us anymore, Mark, I replied quietly. You made sure of that the moment you moved her into our home. The weeks that followed brought revelation after revelation. Karen Chen's continued investigation uncovered offshore accounts, questionable business deductions, and a pattern of financial deception that stretched back further than even I had suspected. Each discovery strengthened my resolve and our legal position. Mark's defense began to crumble under the weight of evidence. His attorney proposed settlement offers with increasingly favorable terms, all of which Daniel advised me to reject. He's desperate now, Daniel explained. He knows the judge has seen enough to potentially refer this for criminal investigation. He's trying to make this go away quickly. The final hearing was scheduled for early spring, almost 9 months after I'd first discovered Ashley in our home. As the date approached, Mark's desperation reached new heights. He showed up unannounced at my office, causing such a scene that security had to escort him out. He sent pleading texts and emails that fluctuated between apologies and accusations. He even enlisted his mother to call me, begging me to stop destroying her son's life. Through it all, I maintained my course. I had come too far, discovered too much to back down now. The night before the final hearing, I stood in what would have been our renovated kitchen, still half finished, the high-end appliances we'd selected, together sitting unused, the custom cabinets only partially installed. Like our marriage, it was a project abandoned midway, full of potential never to be realized. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to truly grieve, not just for the relationship I'd lost, but for the future I'd planned so carefully. The children we'd talked about having once the house was complete. The holiday gatherings in the dining room we'd designed to accommodate our growing family. The retirement we'd mapped out, traveling the world together once Mark's business was established enough to run without him. All gone now, shattered like the antique mirror Mark had accidentally broken during our initial move-in, the one I'd carefully restored piece by piece. But as I wiped away tears, I realized something profound. Just as I'd restored that mirror, I could rebuild my life, differently perhaps, but possibly stronger and more beautiful for having been broken. The final judgment, when it came, was more comprehensive than even Daniel had dared hope. Judge Williams not only awarded me the house and my full share of all discovered assets, but imposed punitive measures for Mark's attempted concealment. The lakeside project property would be sold, with proceeds split between the legitimate business accounts and our marital assets. Mark would be responsible for all my legal fees, and the Florida condo would be transferred solely to my name. The Court takes a particularly dim view of the systematic deception evidenced in this case, Judge Williams stated, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. Mr. Miller's attempts to hide marital assets while simultaneously moving his paramour into the family home demonstrates a level of calculated disregard for his marital obligations that this court cannot overlook. Mark sat stone-faced as the judgment was read, while Ashley, present for the first time during the proceedings, dabbed at mascara-stained tears. I felt nothing watching them, neither satisfaction nor pity. Just a profound relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by spring sunshine that seemed symbolic of new beginnings, Daniel shook my hand warmly. "Congratulations, Jessica. You stood your ground. Not many have the courage to see something like this through to the end." "What happens now?" I asked, the future suddenly stretching before me, unmarked and unknown. "Now," he said with a gentle smile, "you get to decide what comes next. The hard part is over." As I drove home, to my home, legally and unequivocally mine now, I reflected on the journey of the past 9 months. I had entered this battle broken-hearted and betrayed. I was leaving it stronger, wiser, and unexpectedly free. Mark had moved his girlfriend into our home, thinking I would either never discover his betrayal or never fight back if I did. He had underestimated me in every possible way. Now, he would pay, literally and figuratively, for that miscalculation. Every penny he had tried to hide, every lie he had told, every moment of disrespect would cost him not just financially, but in his reputation, his business relationships, and his future prospects. The house still needed renovation. My heart still needed healing. But for the first time since finding that unfamiliar makeup bag on my bathroom counter, I felt a sense of possibility rather than loss. This ending was also a beginning, one I would write myself, on my own terms, with the strength I hadn't known I possessed until Mark's betrayal forced me to find it. The morning after the courthouse victory felt surreal. I awoke in the guest bedroom of what was now legally my house, sunlight filtering through curtains I'd selected years ago. For a moment, I simply stared at the ceiling, letting the reality sink in. It was over. 9 grueling months of legal battles, financial investigations, and emotional turmoil had culminated in Judge Williams's decisive ruling. My phone buzzed, on the nightstand. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. So how does it feel to be the woman who took down Cleveland's most promising young developer? She asked when I answered, quoting the business magazine that had featured Mark last year. Honestly? Strange, I admitted, sitting up and pushing my hair from my face. I expected to feel more, I don't know, triumphant? That comes later, Rachel assured me. Right now, you're probably still in shock. The good kind, but still shock. She was right. Despite the decisive legal victory, I felt oddly hollow. The adrenaline that had propelled me through months of discovery, depositions, and courtroom appearances had evaporated, leaving an uncertain emptiness in its wake. I'm thinking of selling the house, I said, surprising myself with the sudden declaration. What? After everything you went through to keep it? I glanced around the guest room. Like most of the house, it was caught in renovation limbo, partially updated but unfinished, with paint swatches still taped to one wall. It doesn't feel like mine anymore. Every room holds memories of plans we made together, projects we started. Even with the financial settlement, finishing the renovations alone feels... I trailed off, searching for the right word. Overwhelming? Rachel suggested. Pointless, I corrected. This was supposed to be our forever home. Now it's just a very tangible reminder of how thoroughly I was deceived. That's understandable, Rachel said after a moment. But don't make any decisions. Yet, give yourself time to process everything. You fought like hell for that house. I fought for what it represented, I clarified. My right to what was mine. My refusal to let Mark take everything we'd built together. I sighed, running my fingers along the half-painted windowsill. But now that I've won, I'm not sure I want the prize. After saying goodbye to Rachel, I forced myself to get up and face the day. Moving methodically through my morning routine, I tried to envision what came next. My career at Cleveland Memorial was stable, even promising after the recent promotion I'd received. Ironically, during one of the most tumultuous periods of my personal life. Financially, I was more secure than I'd ever expected to be. Between the divorce settlement, my share of the Lakeside project proceeds, and full ownership of both properties. But what about the rest of my life? At 34, I was starting over with an empty house and an unexpected fortune, neither of which brought me the satisfaction I'd anticipated. My phone rang again as I was pouring coffee. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. Fair warning, he said when I answered. Mark is attempting to file an appeal. It's a desperate move that won't go anywhere, but I wanted you to know. I leaned against the kitchen counter. On what grounds? He's claiming the financial investigation overstepped legal boundaries and that some evidence should have been inadmissible. It's a stalling tactic, nothing more. Judge Williams's ruling was airtight. How long will it take to dismiss? A few weeks at most. His new attorney is grasping at straws. Daniel paused. Are you doing all right, Jessica? This is a lot to process. I considered the question seriously. I think I need a project, something to focus on besides Mark and what happened. That's wise. Many of my clients find the aftermath of a contentious divorce almost harder than the proceedings themselves. The battle provided purpose, direction. Now you need to find that for yourself. After we hung up, I wandered through the house, coffee in hand, truly seeing it for the first time since the divorce began. The living room with its exposed beams we'd uncovered during initial renovations. The dining room where we'd hosted exactly 2 dinner parties before deciding it needed a complete overhaul. The master bathroom with its luxurious soaking tub, installed but never used, the surrounding tile work still incomplete. Each space represented thousands of dollars, countless hours, and dreams that no longer belonged to me. Or perhaps more. Accurately, dreams that had never truly existed except in my imagination. On impulse, I grabbed my laptop and began searching real estate listings. If I sold this house in its current condition, What could I afford elsewhere? What kind of fresh start might be possible? A notification popped up on my screen. An email from Karen Chen, the financial investigator whose meticulous work had uncovered Mark's hidden assets. The subject line was cryptic. Something you should see. I opened it immediately, momentarily worried Mark had managed to hide yet another account or property. Instead, I found a link to a real estate listing with a short message. This property is part of a portfolio being liquidated by one of my clients. Given your background and recent situation, I thought it might interest you. The listing goes public next week. Curious, I clicked the link. The property was a historic building in Ohio City, a 2-story brick structure dating back to the 1920s with large display windows and an apartment above. It had most recently been a bookstore but had sat vacant for nearly a year. The price was surprisingly reasonable given the trendy neighborhood and the building's charm. I studied the photos, zooming in on details like the original hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, and large skylights in the second-floor apartment. Something about it called to me, the potential, the character, the opportunity to create something entirely new. Before I could overthink it, I replied to Karen, "I'd like to see it. Can you arrange a showing?" Her response came almost immediately. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. work for you?" That night, I slept better than I had in months, my dreams filled. Not with courtrooms and betrayal, but with sunlight streaming through skylights and the sound of bustling street life outside tall windows. The building was even more compelling in person. Karen met me outside, introducing me to the listing agent, a friendly woman named Elise, who clearly loved the property. The original tenant ran Cleveland's first women's bookstore here from 1968 until her retirement last year, Elise explained as she unlocked the front door. The apartment upstairs was her home for over 50 years. The main floor was open and airy, with built-in bookshelves lining one entire wall and a beautiful central staircase leading to the apartment. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that poured through the front windows, illuminating the potential beneath the current emptiness. The plumbing and electrical were all updated 10 years ago, Elise continued as we explored. And the roof was replaced just before Mrs. Simmons retired. It's in remarkably good condition for its age. The apartment upstairs captivated me immediately. Unlike my half-renovated colonial in Shaker Heights, with its partially realized vision of suburban perfection, this space felt authentic and complete, despite its outdated fixtures. The kitchen was small but functional, with vintage cabinets that could be restored rather than replaced. The bedroom featured a reading nook beneath slanted ceilings, perfect for rainy afternoons. The bathroom's clawfoot tub and black and white hex tile floor needed nothing more than a good cleaning. But it was the living room that truly sold me. A sun-drenched space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a window seat overlooking the street below, and enough room for both comfortable seating and a dining area. I could instantly picture myself there, rebuilding my life in a space untainted by memories of Mark. "What do you think?" Karen asked as we descended the stairs to the main floor. "I love it," I admitted. "But I'm not sure what I'd do with the commercial space. I'm a marketing director, not a shopkeeper." Karen smiled knowingly. "Sometimes, the right space inspires the right idea. Take your time, think about it." But I already knew I wanted the building. Something about its character, its history, its potential for renewal resonated with me in a way my current house never had, even before Mark's betrayal had tainted it. "I'd like to make an offer," I told Elise. "The full asking price, contingent. On inspection, of course." Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's decisive. Are you sure you don't want to think it over?" "I've spent 9 months analyzing every decision to death," I replied. "It's time I started trusting my instincts again." As we left the building, I noticed a "for lease" sign in the window of the adjacent space, a former coffee shop that had closed during the pandemic. An idea began to form, nebulous but exciting. "Do you know who owns the building next door?" I asked Elise. Same owner as this one, she replied. The whole block is part of Mrs. Simmons's estate. Her children are selling everything since none of them live in Ohio anymore. Is that property for sale too, or just for lease? It could be for sale to the right buyer, Elise said carefully. Are you thinking of making an offer on both? I nodded slowly, the idea solidifying as I spoke. I might be. Could you find out what they're asking? On the drive back to Shaker Heights, my mind raced with possibilities. The settlement money from Mark's hidden assets would more than cover the purchase of both buildings. The commercial spaces could be connected to create something larger, more ambitious than a small bookstore or cafe alone. And the apartment would be my fresh start, a clean slate untouched by memories of my marriage. When I arrived home, I walked through each room one final time, mentally cataloging what I would take and what I would leave behind. The furniture we'd selected together could be sold with the house. The family heirlooms I'd inherited from my parents would come with me. The half-finished renovation projects would become someone else's opportunity. I called Rachel from the kitchen, where Mark and I had once shared morning coffee and planned our future. I think I found what I'm going to do next, I said when she answered. That was fast. She laughed. What happened to giving yourself time? Sometimes you just know, I replied, surprising myself with my certainty. I'm buying a building in Ohio City, maybe 2. The upstairs apartment will be my new home, and the commercial space. Well, I have ideas. Ideas like what? Something that combines all the things I'm good at: marketing, organization, creating spaces where people feel welcome. I hesitated, the concept still forming. A place for women to rebuild, professionally and personally. Part workspace, part community center, part cafe. That sounds ambitious, Rachel said carefully. It is. But I've spent years helping the hospital tell its story and connect with patients. I've helped build Mark's business from nothing, handling everything from branding to client relationships. Why not create something of my own? Because retail and hospitality businesses have an incredibly high failure rate? Rachel suggested, though I could hear the smile in her voice. Because you've just been through one of the most stressful experiences possible, and maybe should take time to recover before launching a major new venture. Or maybe this is exactly how I recover, I countered, by building something positive. From all this chaos, using the money that Mark tried to hide to create something meaningful. There was a pause before Rachel responded. You know what? I think you're right, and I think you're going to be amazing at it. That evening, I received confirmation that my offer on the first building had been accepted and a price for the second property that was higher than I'd hoped but still within my budget. I authorized Elise to make an offer on the second building as well, then sat on my back deck watching the sunset, feeling a strange mixture of exhilaration and peace. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Heard you're selling the house. Smart move. You never did have the vision to see its potential. Mark, using yet another new number to circumvent my blocks. For a moment, anger flared at his continued attempts to diminish me, even after losing so thoroughly in court. Then, surprisingly, I felt something close to gratitude. If Mark hadn't betrayed me so completely, if he hadn't moved Ashley into our home, raided our accounts, and forced me to become a financial detective, I would never have discovered my own capabilities. I would never have found the courage to start over entirely, to reimagine my life beyond the boundaries of our marriage. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I called a real estate agent and arranged to list the house the following week. The next month passed in a whirlwind of activity. Mark's appeal was dismissed as Daniel had predicted. The sale of our Shaker Heights home went through quickly, despite its unfinished state. Apparently, half-renovated homes in desirable neighborhoods were catnip to a certain type of buyer who wanted to put their own stamp on a property. Both Ohio City buildings became officially mine after inspections revealed no major issues, and I gave notice at Cleveland Memorial, using my accumulated vacation time to create a buffer between my marketing career and whatever came next. I moved into the apartment above the former bookstore on a sunny Tuesday in June, exactly 1 year after discovering Mark's betrayal. Rachel and her brother helped me carry boxes up the narrow staircase, filling the space with laughter that chased away any lingering shadows from the past year. That evening, after they left, I sat alone by the window seat, watching the street, life below. Young couples strolling hand in hand, groups of friends heading to nearby restaurants. Locals walking dogs and greeting neighbors. I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in Shaker Heights, where our house had been more showpiece than home. The next morning, I woke early, energized in a way I hadn't felt in years. After coffee on my new balcony, I headed downstairs to the empty commercial space that represented my future. Standing in the center of the room, I closed my eyes and envisioned what it could become. The vision had been clarifying over the past weeks, not just a cafe or workspace, but a comprehensive resource center for women in transition, whether from relationships, careers, or life stages. One half would be a coffee shop and wine bar with comfortable seating, excellent Wi-Fi, and private meeting nooks. The other half would host workshops on financial literacy, career development, and personal growth. The connected building would house small business incubation spaces, with shared resources and mentorship opportunities. I would call it Phoenix House, a place of rebirth and transformation. Opening my eyes, I began mentally placing furniture, imagining traffic flow, considering color schemes. The marketing director in me was already crafting brand identity, target demographics, and community outreach strategies. But something else was emerging too. An entrepreneur I hadn't known existed beneath the dutiful wife and corporate professional I'd been for so long. A knock at the front door interrupted my planning. Through the glass, I saw Karen Chen standing on the sidewalk, files tucked under one arm. I unlocked the door, surprised by her unexpected visit. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, stepping inside and looking around appreciatively. "I was meeting with another client nearby and wanted to see what you're doing with the place." "It's still very much in the planning stages," I admitted, gesturing to the empty space. "But I have ideas." Karen nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "I thought you might. That's partly why I pointed you toward this property." She hesitated, then added, "Actually, there's another reason I stopped by. Something came up during the final asset transfer that I thought you should know about." My stomach tightened reflexively. "Is Mark trying to hide more assets?" "No, nothing like that. It's about the Florida condo. When my team was processing the deed transfer, we discovered something unusual in the original purchase documentation." She opened one of her files and handed me a stack of papers. "The condo wasn't purchased directly with funds from the shell company as we initially thought. It was bought by another entity called Whitestone Enterprises and then transferred to Miller Development Group 3 months later." I frowned, scanning the documents. "Why does that matter?" "Because Whitestone Enterprises is owned by Helen Miller, Mark's mother." The revelation shouldn't have surprised me. Helen had always enabled Mark's worst tendencies, from making excuses for his college plagiarism scandal to defending his business practices. Of course she'd been involved in his financial deception. "So his mother helped him hide marital assets," I said flatly. "I'm not exactly shocked." Karen's expression remained serious. "There's more. Whitestone Enterprises doesn't just own property in Florida. It owns commercial real estate throughout Ohio, including 2 buildings in Cleveland that house businesses directly competing with Miller Construction." Now that was interesting. "Are you saying Helen has been investing in Mark's competitors?" "Not just investing. Based on these records, she sits on the board of Gateway Development Group, Miller Construction's biggest local rival." I sat down, heavily on a dusty windowsill, trying to process this information. "Does Mark know?" Karen shrugged. That I couldn't tell you, but it raises some interesting questions about family dynamics, doesn't it? Indeed it did. Mark had always spoken of his mother as his biggest champion, his most loyal supporter. He'd consulted her on major business decisions and often cited her advice as gospel. The idea that she might have been playing both sides, investing in businesses that directly competed with her son's, added yet another layer of complexity to the web of deception that had surrounded my marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked finally. "The divorce is settled. The assets have been divided." Karen closed her file, tucking it back under her arm. Professional courtesy, primarily. I believe in thorough work, and this felt like an unfinished thread. She glanced around the empty storefront again. "Also, I thought it might be relevant to whatever you're planning here. Information is power, especially when rebuilding after betrayal." After Karen left, I remained by the window, turning this new information over in my mind. Helen's duplicity didn't affect me directly anymore. The legal battle was over, the settlement finalized. And yet, it felt significant somehow. Another piece of a puzzle I was still assembling even as I tried to move forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Lunch? I want to hear more about this Phoenix House idea." I smiled, typing back, "A quick agreement." As I locked up the storefront, I realized that while the past year had taught me painful lessons about betrayal, it had also shown me the value of genuine support. Rachel's unwavering friendship, Daniel's professional dedication, Karen's ethical thoroughness, even Robert Johnson's unexpected allyship. These connections had sustained me through the darkest moments and would form the foundation of whatever came next. Rachel was already seated at an outdoor table when I arrived at the bistro 2 blocks from my new building. She waved enthusiastically, gesturing to a second iced coffee she'd ordered for me. "You look different," she observed as I sat down. "More? I don't know, settled, focused." "I feel different," I admitted, taking a sip of the coffee. "Like I've finally stopped reacting to what happened and started creating what comes next." "Tell me everything about this Phoenix House concept," she said, leaning forward eagerly. "It sounds amazing, but also enormous. How are you planning to manage it all?" I shared my evolving vision, from the cafe workspace concept to the workshop, programming to the business incubation spaces. As I spoke, Rachel's expression shifted from curious to impressed to concerned. "Jessica, this is brilliant," she said when I finished. "Truly. But it's also at least 3 full-time jobs. You're talking about being a property manager, cafe owner, educational programmer, and small business mentor simultaneously." "I know it sounds ambitious." "It sounds impossible," Rachel interrupted gently. "Even for someone with your energy and skills. Have you considered starting smaller? Maybe just the cafe and workspace initially, then expanding as you establish yourself?" I started to protest, then stopped, considering her perspective. She wasn't wrong. In my enthusiasm to create something meaningful from the ashes of my marriage, perhaps I was overreaching. The settlement money was substantial but not infinite. Launching 3 connected businesses simultaneously would strain both my financial and personal resources. "You might be right," I conceded. "I'm trying to prove something, to Mark, to myself, to everyone who witnessed my humiliation. Maybe that's not the best foundation for a business plan." Rachel reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You don't have anything to prove, Jess. You already won. Taking Mark down in court, exposing his deception, securing your financial future, you did all that. This next chapter should be about what genuinely fulfills you, not what makes the biggest statement." Her words resonated uncomfortably. Was I designing Phoenix House to fulfill my own needs and passions, or to create a dramatic counter-narrative to Mark's betrayal? The grandeur of my initial vision suddenly seemed suspect, more about making a point than making a difference. What if I started with just the cafe and workspace? I said slowly, recalibrating in real time. Create a welcoming environment. First, build community, then let the programming and additional services evolve organically based on what people actually need. Rachel nodded encouragingly. That sounds more sustainable and more authentic to who you are. We spent the rest of lunch refining this more focused concept. By the time we ordered dessert, my excitement had returned, but with a groundedness that had been missing before. This wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about creating something that aligned with my values and strengths, a space where other women might find the support and resources I'd needed during my own period of transition. Walking back to my building afterward, I felt a new clarity. The commercial space would become a cafe and co-working environment called Phoenix House, designed specifically for women navigating major life transitions. The second building could be rented out initially, generating income while I established the primary business. Eventually, if Phoenix House thrived, expansion would happen naturally. As I approached my building, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street, watching me. Mark. He was leaning against his car, not the sleek Tesla he'd driven during our marriage, but a more modest sedan. Even from a distance, I could see he looked different, thinner, less polished. The confident businessman persona had faded, leaving someone I barely recognized. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the busy street. I waited for the familiar surge of anger, hurt, or anxiety his presence usually triggered. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if observing a character from a story I'd read long ago. Finally, Mark raised his hand in a half-wave, half-salute. Without returning the gesture, I turned and entered my building, letting the heavy door close firmly behind me. Upstairs in my apartment, I went straight to the window, half expecting to see Mark still watching from across the street. But he was gone, his car pulling away from the curb and disappearing around the corner. I wondered briefly what he'd wanted. To intimidate me? To see what I was doing with the money he'd tried to hide? To make some desperate attempt at reconciliation now that Ashley had presumably moved on? Whatever his motivation, I realized it no longer mattered. Mark was part of my past, not my future. The woman who had once built her life around his needs, and dreams had been replaced by someone stronger, more independent, and far less willing to compromise her own vision. That evening, I sat at my new dining table, laptop open, creating a detailed business plan for Phoenix House. As I worked, the pieces came together with a clarity that had been missing from my earlier, more grandiose concept. This was something I could build methodically, thoughtfully, with both passion and pragmatism. When my phone rang close to midnight, I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but some instinct made me pick up. "Jessica Miller?" a woman's voice asked, unfamiliar, and slightly hesitant. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Who's this?" "My name is Valerie Thompson. You don't know me, but I'm calling about Mark Miller." My guard immediately went up. "If you're calling on Mark's behalf, I have nothing to say to him. The divorce is final." No, the woman said quickly. "I'm not calling for Mark. I'm calling because—" She took an audible breath. "I think I might be in a similar situation to what you were in, with Mark." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "We've been dating for about 3 months. He's charming, attentive. Said he was divorced, that his ex-wife took everything in a bitter settlement." Valerie's voice grew quieter. "But I found some financial documents yesterday that don't add up. Multiple accounts, property I didn't know about, and when I asked him about it, he got angry, defensive." A chill ran through me as I recognized the familiar pattern. "Why are you calling me?" "Your name was all over the court documents," she said simply. "I got curious after his reaction and did some research. The public records show quite a different story than the one he told me." I closed my laptop, giving this unexpected call my full attention. "What do you want from me, Valerie?" "Information," she replied, her voice steadying with resolve. "Perspective. How to protect myself if what I suspect is true." I thought about declining, about telling her this wasn't my problem anymore. But something stopped me, the memory of my own confusion and isolation in those early days after discovering Mark's betrayal. How desperately I'd needed guidance from someone who understood what I was facing. "Meet me tomorrow," I said finally. "At the cafe on West 25th, across from the market, 10 o'clock. "Thank you," Valerie said, relief evident in her voice. "You don't know what this means to me." After we hung up, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The unexpected call had crystallized something important about Phoenix House. It wasn't just about creating a business or proving my resilience. It was about transforming my painful experience into something helpful for others, women like Valerie, who were just beginning to recognize the warning signs I had missed for so long. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was on the right path. Phoenix House would become a reality, not as a grandiose statement about my recovery, but as a practical, nurturing space where women could find the resources, community, and strength I had so desperately needed during my own darkest days. Mark had moved his girlfriend into our home, thinking he could discard me without consequences. He had underestimated me at every turn, never imagining I would fight back so effectively or rebuild so completely. Now, ironically, his pattern of deception was continuing with new women. But this time, I could help break the cycle. Tomorrow, I would meet Valerie and share what I'd learned through my ordeal. And in 6 months, Phoenix House would open its doors, offering that same support to countless other women navigating their own journeys from betrayal to empowerment. As I turned away from the window, I felt the last lingering shadows of my marriage finally recede. The future stretched before me, not perfect or painless, but authentically mine at last. 6 months after purchasing the Ohio City buildings, Phoenix House was finally ready to open. The renovation process had been both challenging and therapeutic. Transforming the empty storefront into a welcoming space had given me purpose during a period of profound transition. What had once been a dusty, abandoned bookstore was now an elegant cafe and co-working space designed specifically for women navigating major life changes. The morning of our grand opening, I stood in the center of the main room, taking it all in. Clusters of comfortable seating were arranged to encourage both solitude and conversation. The coffee bar gleamed with new equipment while preserving the building's vintage character. Bookshelves now held carefully curated titles on financial independence, career transitions, and personal growth available for patrons to borrow. Private meeting nooks lined one wall, each equipped with technology for video conferences or quiet work sessions. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Car full of flowers just pulled up outside. You'd better come down and direct traffic." I smiled, heading downstairs where the delivery person was indeed unloading an impressive array of arrangements. Friends and colleagues had been sending good wishes all week. The opening of Phoenix House had generated unexpected buzz in Cleveland's business community, particularly among women entrepreneurs. As I helped arrange the flowers throughout the space, adding warmth and color to the carefully designed interior, Valerie arrived carrying a small bakery box. "I know you have a professional handling the pastries," she said, setting the box on the counter. "But I wanted to bring something special for you. My grandmother's cinnamon rolls. They've been known to cure everything from heartbreak to tax audits." I laughed, touched by the gesture. In the month since our first meeting at that cafe across from the market, Valerie had become an unexpected friend and ally. After confirming her suspicions about Mark's continued pattern of deception, I'd helped her extricate herself from the relationship before significant damage could be done. In return, she'd volunteered countless hours helping prepare Phoenix House for opening, bringing her skills as an interior designer to the project. "They look amazing," I said, peering into the box of perfectly golden rolls. And they'll be gone within an hour once we open the doors. Valerie glanced around the space, nodding with satisfaction. It's perfect, Jessica. Honestly, I still can't believe you pulled this off in 6 months. Neither could I some days. The journey from betrayed wife to business owner had been rapid and intense. There had been moments of doubt, certainly. Nights when I wondered if I was rushing headlong into this new venture to avoid processing the pain of my failed marriage. But each step of the renovation had felt right, each decision rooted in a genuine desire to create something meaningful from my experience. By 9:30, the staff had arrived, 5 women, each with her own story of reinvention. There was Diana, our head barista, who had left an abusive relationship and put herself through culinary school as a single mother. Sophia, our events coordinator, who had rebuilt her career after being downsized from a corporate position she'd held for 20 years. Lauren, our resident financial counselor, who had once been homeless after a divorce left her financially devastated. Each staff member had been carefully selected not just for their professional skills, but for their empathy and lived experience. Places, everyone, I called as the clock approached 10. Let's make this a day to remember. When we unlocked the doors at precisely 10 a.m., I was unprepared for the crowd waiting outside. Women of all ages stood patiently in line, drawn by the pre-opening publicity and word-of-mouth buzz. Some came alone, laptops tucked under their arms, clearly intending to use the co-working features. Others arrived in pairs or small groups, eager to explore the space together. The first woman through the door was elderly, perhaps in her 80s, leaning slightly on a cane but moving with determination. "Welcome to Phoenix House," I greeted her, extending my hand. "I'm Jessica Miller, the owner." "Margaret Simmons," she replied with a firm handshake. "I understand you bought my bookstore." I blinked in surprise. "You're Mrs. Simmons? The woman who ran the women's bookstore here for 50 years? She nodded, a twinkle in her eye. I wanted to see what became of my life's work. My children. Thought I should be upset about the bookstore closing, but times change. People read differently now. Her gaze swept the transformed space. This, though. This I understand. A new kind of sanctuary for women. Different format, same spirit. Tears pricked my eyes unexpectedly. "Would you like a tour? I'd love to show you what we've done." For the next half hour, I guided Margaret through the space, explaining our mission and services. She nodded approvingly at the financial literacy workshops we had scheduled, raised an eyebrow at the modern technology in our meeting rooms, and smiled broadly at the small lending library we'd established in her honor. "You've done good work here," she said finally, settling into one of the plush armchairs by the window, the very spot where her checkout counter had once stood. "This place will help many women find their way." The rest of the morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions, explanations, and the constant hum of the espresso machine. By noon, every seat was filled, and the energy in the room was exactly what I'd envisioned. Purposeful, but relaxed, supportive without being cloying. Rachel arrived during the lunch rush, navigating through the crowd with an impressed expression. "This is incredible," she said, giving me a quick hug. "You've created something magical here, Jess." "It's just day one," I cautioned, though I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. "We'll see if it lasts." "It will," Rachel said confidently. "You're filling a need no one else recognized. That's the definition of successful entrepreneurship." As the afternoon progressed, I circulated through the space, chatting with customers and gathering feedback. Women from all walks of life had found their way to Phoenix House. Young professionals seeking quiet workspace away from distracting offices, middle-aged women planning career changes, retired individuals looking for community, single mothers, utilizing our childcare room for an hour of peace. Around 3 o'clock, I noticed a familiar face sitting alone in one of the window seats, Helen Miller. Mark's mother. My first instinct was defensive alarm, but curiosity quickly replaced it. What was she doing here? Steeling myself, I approached her table. "Hello, Helen. This is unexpected." She looked up, her expression unreadable. Unlike her son, Helen had always been difficult to predict, poised and proper in public, but with an undercurrent of calculation I'd never fully trusted. "Jessica," she acknowledged, setting down her teacup. "Congratulations on your new venture. It's quite impressive." "Thank you," I replied cautiously, "but that doesn't explain why you're here." Helen gestured to the chair across from her. "May I have a moment of your time?" Against my better judgment, I sat down. Whatever Helen wanted, confronting it directly, seemed preferable to wondering about her motives. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, surprising me completely. My involvement in Mark's deception was inexcusable. I remained silent, waiting for the qualifier, the justification, the attempt to minimize what she and Mark had done. None came. "You discovered Whitestone Enterprises," she continued when I didn't respond. "My investment company. Karen Chen." "Is very thorough," I replied neutrally. Helen nodded, a flicker of respect crossing her features. "Indeed. Then you know I've been operating in competition with my own son's business for years." She sighed, smoothing her already immaculate hair. "What you probably don't know is why." "I assumed it was simple greed," I said bluntly. "A family tradition, apparently." To my surprise, Helen didn't bristle at the accusation. "Mark's father was like him," she said quietly. "Charming, ambitious, and utterly untrustworthy. He left me for his secretary when Mark was 10, leaving us nearly destitute, despite the successful business we'd built together." This was news to me. Mark had always described his father's early death as a tragic accident, never mentioning divorce or abandonment. "I rebuilt from nothing," Helen continued. "Created my own investments, secured my financial independence. I promised myself no man would ever control my future again." Her gaze was direct, unflinching. When Mark began showing signs of his father's character, the entitlement, the deception, the lack of accountability, I started separating my assets from his business ventures, protecting myself. "While helping him deceive me," I pointed out, unwilling to let her off the hook entirely. "Yes," she admitted. "That was my failure. I saw the pattern repeating, my son doing to you what his father did to me, and instead of warning you, I helped him. For that, I am deeply sorry." The apology seemed genuine, though it did little to heal the damage her actions had caused. "Why tell me this now? The divorce is final. The assets have been divided." Helen gestured around the bustling cafe. "Because you've created something remarkable from the ashes of what my son destroyed. Because you deserve to know the full story." She hesitated, then added more softly, "And because I admire what you've done. It took me years to rebuild after my husband's betrayal. You've done it in months." I didn't know how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability from a woman who had always presented herself as the picture of controlled perfection. "I'd like to make an investment in Phoenix House," Helen said abruptly, reaching into her handbag and withdrawing a business card. "Not as atonement, money doesn't erase betrayal, but as recognition of a sound business concept with growth potential." I took the card automatically, too surprised to refuse. "You want to invest in my business after everything that happened?" "I invest in women rebuilding their lives after men have betrayed them," Helen said simply. "It's what Whitestone Enterprises has always been about, though few know it. Your concept aligns perfectly with my investment thesis." The revelation cast Helen Miller in an entirely new light. Not just Mark's enabling mother or a co-conspirator in financial fraud, but a woman with her own complex history in response to betrayal. "I'll think about it," I said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting her offer outright. Helen nodded, rising gracefully. "That's all I ask. My contact information is on the card." She paused, glancing around the space once more. "What you've created here is important, Jessica. Don't let what my son did limit its potential." After she left, I remained seated, turning her business card over in my hands. The encounter had been surreal, further evidence that the neat categories of villain and victim rarely captured the complexity of real lives and relationships. By closing time at 8, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The day had exceeded every expectation, from customer numbers to positive feedback to actual revenue. As the last patrons gathered their belongings and said their goodbyes, several made a point of telling me they'd be back tomorrow, bringing friends who needed the space. After the staff had completed closing procedures and departed, I found myself alone in the quiet cafe, finally able to absorb the reality of what I'd accomplished. Phoenix House had transformed from an idea born of betrayal to a tangible, functioning business in just 6 months. I climbed the stairs to my apartment above, changed into comfortable clothes, and returned to the cafe with a glass of wine. Sitting in the window seat where I'd spoken with Helen earlier, I watched the evening foot traffic on the street outside, couples heading to dinner, friends meeting for drinks, neighbors walking dogs. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Heard through the grapevine that Phoenix House was packed all day. Congratulations. You've come a long way from that first meeting in my office." I smiled, remembering the devastated woman who had sat across from Daniel's desk less than 18 months ago, clutching bank statements and security footage, unable to comprehend the depth of her husband's betrayal. That version of me had been shattered, struggling to imagine any future beyond the immediate pain. Yet here I was, owner of a thriving new business, financially secure, and surrounded by a community of supportive women, some friends, some staff, some customers, but all connected by the shared experience of rebuilding after significant life changes. Mark's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. Without the painful unraveling of my marriage, I might never have discovered my own capabilities or recognized the needs of women in similar situations. Phoenix House would never have existed. As I finished my wine, my thoughts turned to Helen's unexpected investment offer. Could I possibly partner with the mother of the man who had betrayed me so thoroughly? The idea seemed absurd on its face. And yet, her story had resonated with me. Another woman who had channeled the pain of betrayal into financial independence and purposeful action. Perhaps that was the most powerful legacy of the past 18 months. The recognition that women had been transforming betrayal into strength, pain into purpose, endings into beginnings for generations. I was merely the latest in a long line stretching back to women like Margaret Simmons, who had created her feminist bookstore in 1968 when such spaces barely existed, and forward to whatever Valerie and others like her would build from their own experiences. My phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the security system Mark had insisted on installing in our Shaker Heights home, the very system that had captured his betrayal. I'd forgotten to disable the app after selling the house, and now it was alerting me to motion on the property. The new owners must have finally moved in. I deleted the app without watching the footage, a symbolic final severance from my former life. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a business plan for Phoenix House's expansion into the second building, a more formal workspace and educational center to complement the cafe and community space. Mark had moved his girlfriend into our home, thinking I would either never discover his betrayal or never have the resources to challenge it. He had underestimated me at every turn, never imagining that his actions would ultimately lead to my empowerment rather than my destruction. Now, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my resilience, I could almost feel grateful for the painful journey that had brought me here. Almost. As I closed my laptop and prepared to head upstairs for the night, I caught sight of my reflection in the darkened window. Stronger, more confident, more authentically myself than the woman who had once built her life around a husband's needs and ambitions. Phoenix House was more than just a business. It was proof that betrayal didn't have to define a woman's story. It could instead become the catalyst for creating something far more meaningful than what was lost. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, indifferent to my personal victory. But inside these walls, everything had changed. I had moved from victim to creator, from betrayed wife to empowered entrepreneur. The money Mark had tried to hide had funded not just my financial recovery, but a space where other women could find the support and resources they needed to write their own next chapters. That, I decided as I switched off the lights and headed upstairs, was the most satisfying revenge of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.